A millionaire pretends to be paraplegic to test a little beggar. The girl's actions brought him to tears. The massive iron gates of the Wellington estate creaked open as Alexander Wellington's sleek black Mercedes glided through. The autumn. Leaves scattered across the winding driveway, dancing in the wake of the vehicle. From behind the tinted windows, Alexander observed his sprawling mansion with detached indifference, the same way he had for the past 5 years. At 62, Alexander Wellington was one of the most successful real estate magnates in the country. His empire stretched across 3 states, with properties valued in the billions. Yet, as his chauffeur James pulled up to the mansion's entrance, the success felt hollow, meaningless. "Will you be needing anything else this evening, sir?" James asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous garage. Alexander shook his head, his silver hair catching the dim light. "No, James, you can go home." He stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. The sound echoed through the empty space, a reminder of how alone he truly was. Inside the mansion, Alexander loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of scotch. The crystal decanter clinked against the glass, the only sound in the vast living room. His eyes wandered to the grand staircase, where countless photographs once lined the wall. Now only empty hooks remained, the wallpaper slightly lighter where frames once hung. He settled into his favorite leather armchair, the one facing the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. From this height, the cars looked like tiny insects crawling along illuminated paths. His gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where a dollhouse gathered dust, the last birthday gift he had given to Sarah. The thought of his daughter sent a familiar ache through his chest. 5 years had passed, but the pain remained as fresh as ever. He took another sip of scotch, letting the burning sensation distract him from the memories. His phone buzzed, displaying his assistant's name. "Yes, Margaret?" "Mr. Wellington, the board is requesting your presence at tomorrow's meeting. They're concerned about the new development project in the financial district." Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell them I'll be there." He ended the call abruptly, not waiting for a response. Rising from his chair, he walked to the window. Below, the city lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. His empire stretched before him, yet he felt nothing. The recent medical results weighed heavily on his mind. The confirmation of his sterility had been the final blow. With Sarah gone, and no possibility of having more children, his legacy would die with him. A bitter smile crossed his face as he remembered this morning's drive through the city's affluent streets. Among the well-dressed pedestrians and luxury cars, he had spotted her again, the little girl with the bright smile who sat at the corner of 5th and Madison. Unlike the other street children who aggressively approached passers-by, she simply sat there, quietly accepting whatever kindness came her way. For some inexplicable reason, he couldn't get her out of his mind. Perhaps it was the way she smiled, even when people rushed past without a glance. Or maybe it was how she shared her meager provisions with the pigeons that gathered around her. There was something about her that stirred long-dormant emotions in his chest. Alexander walked to his study, where a wall of security monitors displayed feeds from his various properties. He pressed a button and the screen showing 5th and Madison enlarged. The corner was empty now, but tomorrow she would be there again, with that same gentle smile that haunted his thoughts. An idea began to form in his mind. After years of watching humanity's greed and selfishness destroy everything he loved, he had become cynical, distrustful. But this girl, there was something different about her, something that made him wonder if genuine kindness still existed in this world. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "James, I need you to arrange something for me. Tomorrow I want you to get me some old clothes and a wheelchair. Make sure they look worn, used. And James, this stays between us." As he ended the call, Alexander walked to the safe hidden behind a painting in his study. Inside, among various documents and valuables, lay a small silver locket. He opened it, revealing a photograph of a smiling teenage girl with flowing brown hair. His fingers traced the image gently. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room. "I need to know if there's still hope in this world." The morning sun cast long shadows across 5th Avenue as Lucy arranged her small cardboard sign against the building wall. At 10 years old, she'd already mastered the art of becoming invisible to the rushing crowds, yet remaining noticeable, enough to receive occasional charity. Her worn backpack contained everything she owned: a thin blanket, a half-empty water bottle, and a mysterious silver necklace she'd had for as long as she could remember. "Good morning, Mr. Phillips," she called out to the hot dog vendor who set up his cart nearby. He gave her a sad smile and, like every morning, pretended to find an extra hot dog that he couldn't sell. Lucy accepted it gratefully, breaking it in half. One part for now, one for later. As the morning crowd thickened, Lucy observed the familiar faces passing by. The young executive who always checked his reflection in the store windows, the elderly woman with her designer shopping bags, and the businessman who pretended to be on his phone whenever he passed her. She had names for all of them in her head, little stories she'd invented about their lives. A group of pigeons landed nearby, and Lucy broke off a small piece of her hot dog. "Here you go, friends," she whispered, scattering the crumbs. "Share nicely now." The birds cooed and pecked at the offering, making her smile. In these moments, she didn't feel so alone. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Lucy pulled her threadbare jacket closer. Despite the chill, she maintained her gentle smile. Mrs. Anderson, her last foster mother, had always said a smile could change someone's entire day. It was one of the few good lessons Lucy had learned during her brief stays in various homes. As noon approached, she noticed something unusual. An elderly man in a wheelchair had positioned himself about 20 feet away. His clothes were tattered, his wheelchair rusty, and his grey hair unkempt. What caught Lucy's attention wasn't his appearance, but rather how out of place he seemed. His posture, even while slumped in the wheelchair, carried an air of dignity she recognized from the wealthy people who usually hurried past her. Throughout the day, Lucy kept stealing glances at the man. She noticed how he struggled to maneuver his wheelchair, how his hands trembled when he tried to adjust his position. Something about him tugged at her heart, reminding her of the kind janitor at her last orphanage who had shared his lunch with her every day until the fire took everything away. As the afternoon wore on, the man's breathing became labored, and Lucy heard him mumbling about hunger. She looked down at the remaining half of her hot dog, her dinner. Without hesitation, she stood up, brushed off her worn jeans, and approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Would you like some food?" The man looked up, and for a moment Lucy caught a flash of something in his eyes. Surprise? Recognition? But it disappeared so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. His hands shook as he accepted the offered food. "Thank you, child," he said, his voice rough. "What's your name?" "Lucy," she replied, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. The motion caused her necklace to catch the light, and she noticed the man's eyes fix on it momentarily. "That's a beautiful necklace," he commented, his voice carefully neutral. Lucy's hand instinctively went to the silver pendant. "Thank you, I've had it since, well, forever, I guess." She didn't mention how it was her only connection to a past she couldn't remember, how she sometimes opened it late at night, hoping the empty locket would somehow reveal its secrets. The man seemed about to say something else, but a passing police officer caught Lucy's attention. She quickly retreated to her corner, years of instinct taking over. When she looked back, the man was watching her with an unreadable expression. As the sun began to set, Lucy gathered her few belongings. The man in the wheelchair remained, his figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. She hesitated, wondering if she should offer him her blanket. But before she could decide, a sleek black car pulled up, and a chauffeur helped him into the vehicle. Lucy watched the car disappear into traffic, a strange feeling settling in her chest. Something about the man seemed familiar, like a half-remembered dream. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Tomorrow would be another day of survival, and she couldn't afford to get lost in mysteries. The next morning arrived with a light drizzle that painted Fifth Avenue in muted colors. Alexander sat in his study, watching the security feeds as his staff prepared for another day. The events of yesterday had left him restless, tossing and turning through the night. The girl's, Lucy's, simple act of kindness had affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. "James," he called through the intercom, "is everything prepared for today?" "Yes, sir. The wheelchair and clothes are in the car. I've also..." Arrange for some coins to be strategically scattered near your location. Alexander nodded to himself. Good. And the background check on the girl? Still in progress, sir. These cases can be complicated. Many records were lost in the orphanage fire 3 years ago. The mention of the fire stirred something in Alexander's memory. He remembered reading about it in the papers, a tragic accident that had displaced dozens of children. Had Lucy been there? The thought of her experiencing such trauma made his chest tighten unexpectedly. An hour later, Alexander found himself back in the wheelchair, positioned slightly closer to Lucy's corner than the day before. The drizzle had stopped, but the dampness clung to his borrowed clothes, making the disguise feel even more authentic. Lucy arrived right on schedule, her small figure carrying the same worn backpack. Today she wore a faded blue sweater that was several sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. Despite the gloomy weather, her smile remained as bright as ever. Alexander watched as she went through her morning routine, greeting the hot dog vendor, sharing her food with the pigeons, offering kind words to those who passed by. Every gesture revealed a depth of character that seemed impossible for someone who had experienced such hardship. As midday approached, Alexander initiated the second test. With deliberate clumsiness, he let a handful of coins slip from his pocket, the metal pieces scattering across the wet pavement. Several rolled toward Lucy's corner, glinting temptingly in the weak sunlight. A businessman hurrying past kicked one of the coins, sending it spinning directly to Lucy's feet. Alexander held his breath, watching her reaction through hooded eyes. The girl looked at the coin, then at him, her expression thoughtful. Without hesitation, she began gathering the scattered pieces, her small hands carefully picking up each one. A well-dressed woman passed by, stepping over Lucy as if she were invisible. Alexander felt a surge of anger at the woman's indifference, but Lucy remained unfazed. She continued her task until she had collected every coin. Standing up, Lucy approached his wheelchair, her steps careful but confident. "I think these belong to you, sir," she said, holding out her cupped hands. The coins gleamed against her palm. Enough money to buy her a proper meal, perhaps even a new sweater. Alexander's hands trembled, this time not from acting, as he accepted the coins. "You're very honest, child," he said, studying her face. "Many would have kept them." Lucy shrugged, a gesture that seemed too mature for her young age. "Money comes and goes, but kindness stays with you forever. At least, that's what Sister Mary used to say." A shadow crossed her face at the mention of the name, and Alexander noticed her hand unconsciously move to the silver necklace. "Sister Mary?" he prompted gently. "She was—" Lucy paused, looking uncertain. "She was someone who cared for me. Before everything changed." She glanced away, and Alexander recognized the look of someone trying to hold back painful memories. A street musician began playing nearby, the melancholic notes of his violin floating through the air. Lucy's face brightened at the sound. "Do you like music, sir?" she asked, clearly eager to change the subject. "I used to," Alexander replied, allowing some truth into his performance. "My daughter played the piano. She filled our house with music." "Used to?" Lucy's perceptive question caught him off guard. Before he could respond, a commotion further down the street drew Lucy's attention. A group of teenagers was harassing the hot dog vendor, knocking over his condiment containers. Without hesitation, Lucy hurried over to help the old man clean up, leaving Alexander to marvel at her instinctive kindness. As he watched her assist the vendor, Alexander noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. When Lucy bent down to pick up the scattered napkins, her necklace swung forward. In the brief moment it caught the light, he glimpsed an intricate pattern engraved on its surface, a pattern he had seen before, on a piece of jewelry he had commissioned years ago as a gift for his daughter's 16th birthday. The revelation left him struggling to maintain his composure. It couldn't be possible. Yet the design was unmistakable, the intertwined roses and thorns that Sarah had specifically requested, saying they represented life's beauty and pain existing together. By the time Lucy returned, Alexander had managed to school his features back into the expression of a weary old man, But inside his mind was racing. He needed to know more about this girl, about where she had gotten that necklace, about her life before the orphanage. "Thank you for helping, Mr. Phillips," he said, noting how she knew the vendor's name. Not many would bother. Lucy's smile held a wisdom beyond her years. "We all need help sometimes, even when we pretend we don't." She looked at him knowingly, and for a terrifying moment, Alexander wondered if his disguise wasn't as perfect as he thought. Back in his mansion that evening, Alexander paced his study, unable to shake the image of the necklace from his mind. He had ordered his security team to pull up every available record about the orphanage fire, every document about children who had been displaced, but the information was frustratingly sparse. "Mr. Wellington," Margaret's voice came through the intercom. "Your investigator is here." Alexander pressed the button to let them in. Daniel Parker, a former detective turned private investigator, entered the study carrying a thick folder. His weathered face suggested long hours spent pursuing this case. "What have you found?" Alexander asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Parker spread several documents across the mahogany desk. "The girl's official name is Lucy Foster, but that's just what the orphanage gave her. She was abandoned as an infant, left at St. Catherine's Home for Children with nothing but a silver necklace and a blanket." Alexander's hands clenched involuntarily. "And before the fire? What about her records from then?" "Most were destroyed," Parker replied, shuffling through papers. "But I found something interesting. The necklace was logged as a distinctive piece of jewelry in her intake forms. The description mentions custom engravings of roses and thorns." The confirmation made Alexander sink into his chair. Could it be possible? His mind raced back to Sarah's last year. How distant she had become. How she had refused to come home from college during spring break, saying she needed to focus on her studies. Had there been something else? Something she couldn't tell? Him? "There's more," Parker continued, pulling out a photograph. "This was taken at the orphanage about 4 years ago." Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The picture showed Lucy, younger but unmistakable, playing in the orphanage garden. But it wasn't her appearance that stunned him. It was her posture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the slight tilt of her head. Gestures he had seen countless times before in another little girl who had once filled these halls with laughter. "Sir?" Parker's voice seemed to come from far away. "There's something else you should know. I did some digging into the time before. Lucy was abandoned. There were medical records from a private clinic under a different name, a young woman, barely 20, who gave birth and then disappeared. The dates would match." Alexander held up his hand, needing a moment to process. Could Sarah have hidden this from him? His own daughter, pregnant and alone, making choices he would never know about? The weight of possibility crushed against his chest. "Find everything you can about that clinic," he ordered. "Every doctor, every nurse who worked there during that time. And Parker, be discreet, if this is what I think it is." The investigator nodded understanding and gathered his documents. As the door closed behind him, Alexander walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. The city sparkled below, indifferent to the turmoil in his heart. His phone buzzed, a message from James confirming tomorrow's arrangements. Alexander had planned another test for Lucy, but now everything felt different. Each interaction with her had stripped away layers of his cynicism, revealing something he had thought long buried: hope. He opened his safe and took out Sarah's locket again, comparing it in his mind to the one Lucy wore. The similarities were undeniable, but beyond the physical evidence there was something else, something in Lucy's spirit that reminded him so much of Sarah, the same innate kindness, the same quiet strength. A memory surfaced. Sarah, at 10 years old, using her allowance to buy food for stray cats, saying everyone deserved kindness. Now here was Lucy, with nothing to her name, sharing what little she had with others. The parallel was both beautiful and painful. Alexander's gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, the last picture taken of Sarah at her college graduation. She was smiling, but now he noticed something he had missed before, a subtle protectiveness in the way her hand rested on her stomach, a secret hidden behind her eyes. "Oh, Sarah," he whispered to the photograph. "What were you trying to tell me? What didn't I see?" The question echoed in the empty room unanswered. Outside, clouds gathered, promising another day of rain. Tomorrow, he would return to his role as the helpless old man in the wheelchair. But tonight, Alexander Wellington sat alone in his study, wrestling with the possibility that the little girl he had set out to test might be the answer to prayers he had never dared to voice. The third day of Alexander's test dawned cold and bitter, with a biting wind that swept through the city streets. From his wheelchair, he watched as Lucy arrived at her usual spot, her thin jacket offering little protection against the elements. Despite the harsh weather, she maintained her routine, sharing her meager breakfast with the pigeons that huddled nearby for warmth. Today's test would be different. Alexander had instructed James to observe from their car, documenting every interaction. As night approached and temperatures continued to drop, he would see how far Lucy's kindness extended. The rational part of his mind told him this was unnecessary. She had already proved her character. But another part, the part still wrestling with the possibility of her true identity, needed to be absolutely certain. Throughout the day, Alexander noticed Lucy watching him with increasing concern. The wind had picked up, and he made sure to shiver visibly, his borrowed clothes providing little warmth. Several times he caught her glancing at her worn backpack, where he knew she kept her only blanket. "Sir?" Her voice came just as the streetlights began to flicker on. "Here it's getting really cold. Maybe you should try to find shelter for the night." Alexander hunched further in his wheelchair. "Nobody wants an old man like me in their shelter," he muttered, allowing his voice to tremble. "I'll manage here." Lucy bit her lower lip, a gesture so reminiscent of Sarah that it made his heart ache. She looked up at the darkening sky, then back at him. Without a word, she opened her backpack and pulled out her blanket, threadbare and patched, but clearly her most precious possession. "Here," she said, approaching him. "You need this more than I do." Alexander stared at the offered blanket, genuine emotion tightening his throat. "But what about you?" Lucy smiled, that same bright smile that had first caught his attention. "I know a place where I can stay warm. There's a vent behind the bakery that blows out hot air all night. But you can't move around as easily." As she draped the blanket over his legs, Alexander noticed her hands were red from the cold. Yet she showed no hesitation in giving away her only source of warmth. The gesture reminded him of another winter day years ago when Sarah had given her expensive coat to a homeless woman outside their church. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Most people just walk by." Lucy adjusted the blanket carefully around his shoulders before answering. "Someone once told me that we're all connected, like stars in the sky. Even when we can't see the connection, it's still there." She touched her necklace absently. "I don't remember who said it, but it feels true, doesn't it?" Alexander's breath caught. He remembered those words. He had said them to Sarah on a starlit night after her mother's passing, trying to explain that love transcended physical presence. Had Sarah passed that wisdom on to her own daughter? "You remind me of someone," he said carefully, studying her face. "Someone very special." Lucy's eyes lit up with interest. "Your daughter, the one who played piano?" "Yes." Alexander felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "She had a heart like yours, always thinking of others first." A gust of wind made Lucy shiver, though she tried to hide it. Alexander wanted nothing more than to end this charade, to take her away from the cold streets and give her the life she deserved. But he knew he needed more proof, more certainty before he could take that step. "You should go find that warm vent now," he said gently. "The temperature's dropping." Lucy hesitated. "Will you be okay?" "I could stay. I'll be fine, child." "This blanket will keep me warm." He patted her hand. "Thank you for your kindness." As Lucy gathered her backpack, a piece of paper fell from a side pocket. Alexander watched as she picked it up carefully, treating it like a precious treasure. Just before she tucked it away, he caught a glimpse of what looked like a photograph, its edges worn from frequent handling. "What's that?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Lucy's face softened. It's the only picture I have from before. I don't remember when it was taken, but... She pulled it out again, showing him a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby. The woman's face was partially obscured, but Alexander could make out a familiar silver necklace around her neck. His hands trembled, and not from the cold. The woman in the photo was wearing the same necklace that now hung around Lucy's neck, the necklace he had given Sarah. But before he could look closer, Lucy tucked the photo away. "I should go," she said, pulling her jacket tighter. "Please, keep warm, sir. I'll see you tomorrow." Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched as she disappeared around the corner, her small figure swallowed by the gathering darkness. As soon as she was gone, James appeared with the car. "Sir," his chauffeur asked, helping him into the vehicle, "are you all right? You're shaking." But Alexander barely heard him. His mind was focused on the photograph, on the glimpse of the woman who must have been Sarah, his daughter, Lucy's mother. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that both thrilled and terrified him. Back in his mansion, he held Lucy's blanket, studying it in the soft lamplight. Among the patches and repairs, he noticed something. A small embroidered letter S in one corner, almost completely faded. Sarah's signature, the way she had marked all her belongings at boarding school. Alexander reached for his phone. "Parker, I need you to find out everything you can about that photograph Lucy carries, and I mean everything." The following morning, Alexander sat in his study, surrounded by the files Parker had delivered. The investigator had worked through the night, tracking down every possible lead about the photograph. What he discovered had left Alexander reeling. The picture had been taken at a small clinic just outside the city, the same one mentioned in the earlier reports. A nurse who still worked there remembered Sarah, remembered how young and scared she had looked, how she had insisted on wearing her silver necklace even during the delivery. "Mr. Wellington?" Margaret's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Senator Richardson is here for your meeting." Alexander had forgotten about the appointment. Robert Richardson was a powerful figure in local politics, known for his ambitious urban development projects. Today's meeting was supposed to be about a new business district, but Alexander's mind was elsewhere. "Send him in," he said, quickly hiding Lucy's blanket and the files. Richardson strode into the study, his expensive suit and confident smile a stark contrast to the humble characters Alexander had been surrounded by lately. "Alexander, good to see you, old friend." But Alexander noticed something odd in Richardson's expression, a calculating look that set him on edge. The senator settled into a chair without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room with unusual interest. "I hear you've been spending time in some interesting places lately," Richardson said casually. "Fifth Avenue isn't your usual. Haunting ground, is it?" Alexander kept his face neutral. "I oversee properties throughout the city. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Robert?" "Actually, yes," Richardson leaned forward. "There's a particular piece of property that's caught my attention. The old St. Catherine's orphanage site." The mention of Lucy's former home made Alexander's pulse quicken. "What about it?" "Well, after that unfortunate fire, the land has been sitting vacant. My committee thinks it would be perfect for a new development project." Richardson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But we've hit a snag. It seems some of the old documentation about the property's ownership is complicated." "How so?" "There are questions about the original deed, about what happened to certain records during the fire." Richardson waved his hand dismissively. "But what's really interesting is the sudden interest in one of the former residents, a little girl named Lucy Foster." Alexander's hands clenched under his desk. "I wasn't aware that individual orphans were of interest to the Urban Development Committee." "Oh, everything interests me, Alexander, especially when one of the city's most prominent businessmen starts playing homeless just to get close to a street child." Richardson's voice hardened. "What's your interest in the girl, Alexander?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Alexander replied coldly. "No?" Richardson pulled out his phone, showing a grainy photo of Alexander in his wheelchair, disguised, talking to Lucy. "My sources are quite thorough. The question is, what would the press make of this? A wealthy man deceiving a vulnerable child. Alexander felt a surge of anger. "Are you threatening me, Robert?" "Threatening? Not at all. I'm simply suggesting that we could help each other. You back away from whatever you're planning with the girl, support my development project, and these photos never see the light of day. And if I refuse," Richardson stood, straightening his tie, "then things could become very uncomfortable for you, Alexander. Reputations are fragile things, especially when children are involved. Think about it." After Richardson left, Alexander sat in silence, his mind racing. The senator's threat was clear, but it only confirmed what Alexander had begun to suspect. There was more to the orphanage fire than a simple accident. The missing records, the complicated property ownership, Richardson's unusual interest in Lucy, it all pointed to something darker. He pressed the intercom. "Margaret, get me Parker immediately. And James, bring the car around. We need to move faster than planned." While waiting, Alexander opened his safe and removed a thick envelope. Inside were documents he had prepared just in case, adoption papers, legal guardianship forms, everything needed to protect Lucy. But Richardson's visit had changed the timeline. He couldn't wait any longer to confirm his suspicions about Lucy's identity. She needed protection now. His phone buzzed with a message from Parker. "Found something big. About the orphanage fire. Not an accident. Need to meet in person." Alexander looked out his window at the city below, knowing that somewhere out there Lucy was sitting on her corner, unaware of the forces gathering around her. He had started this journey to test her character, but now he understood. She wasn't the one being tested. He was. The intercom crackled. "Sir, the car is ready." Alexander gathered the documents and Lucy's blanket. It was time to end the charade and face the truth, whatever it might be. But first, he needed to ensure Lucy's safety. Richardson's threat had made one thing clear. The innocent girl on the corner had powerful enemies, and Alexander Wellington was possibly her only protection. Parker sat across from Alexander in a quiet cafe 3 blocks from Fifth Avenue, his expression grave as he spread documents across the table. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving them relatively isolated in a corner booth. "The fire at St. Catherine's wasn't random," Parker began, sliding over a series of photographs. "I found maintenance records from the month before. Multiple requests for electrical repairs were mysteriously cancelled. And this," he pointed to a document with an official letterhead, "is a report from a fire inspector who was pressured to change his findings." Alexander studied the papers, his coffee growing cold beside him. Richardson's involvement, deep but well hidden. The property was worthless until the orphanage was gone. Afterward, land values in the area skyrocketed. Several shell companies linked to Richardson's associates purchased surrounding properties weeks before the fire. The implications made Alexander's stomach turn. He thought of Lucy, of how many children had lost their home that night. What about the original orphanage records? Parker lowered his voice. "Most were destroyed, but I found something interesting. A former administrator kept personal copies of certain files." He pulled out a worn manila envelope, including this. Inside was a hospital record from the night Lucy was brought to St. Catherine's. The details made Alexander's hands shake. A young woman, admitted under the name Sarah Foster, had left her baby at the orphanage. The intake form noted a silver necklace with a distinctive rose and thorn pattern. "There's more," Parker continued. "I tracked down a nurse who worked that night. She remembered Sarah clearly, said the girl was desperate to keep her father from finding out, but wanted her baby to have something to remember her by." Alexander closed his eyes, memories washing over him. Sarah's sudden distance during her final year of college, her refusal to come home for holidays, the way she had clutched her necklace during their last conversation. How had he been so blind? "Sir," Parker's voice gentled, "there's something else you need to see." He produced another document, this one dated just days before Sarah's accident. She had started adoption papers. She was planning to reclaim Lucy. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sarah had been coming back for her daughter. She had finally found the courage to tell him the truth, but fate had intervened in the cruelest way possible. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the cafe window, Alexander could see Lucy at her usual corner, but something was different. Two men in dark suits were approaching her, their movements too purposeful to be casual passers-by. "Richardson's people," Parker muttered, already reaching for his phone. Alexander stood, his protective instincts surging. "Get the car. Now." But before either of them could move, they witnessed something unexpected. Lucy, spotting the men's approach, didn't run. Instead, she calmly packed her few belongings and walked into the nearby department store, a clever move, as the men couldn't follow without drawing attention. "Smart girl," Parker commented. "She's survived on these streets longer than we realized." Alexander watched as Lucy emerged from the store's other entrance, disappearing into the crowd. The men looked frustrated, speaking into their phones as they scanned the area. "She can't keep running forever," Alexander said, his decision crystallizing. "It's time to end this game." "Sir, if you reveal yourself now, Richardson will—" "Richardson is the least of my concerns." Alexander pulled out his phone. "Margaret, initialize Protocol 7. Yes, everything. And contact Judge Harrison. I need those emergency guardianship." Papers processed immediately. Protocol 7 was something Alexander had established years ago but never used. A complete media blackout, maximum security measures, and the mobilization of his entire legal team. It was designed for worst-case scenarios, and protecting his granddaughter certainly qualified. "Parker, I need you to do two things," Alexander continued, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had built his empire. "First, find everything you can about Richardson's connections to the orphanage fire. Everything. Second, track down every person who knew about Sarah's pregnancy, nurses, doctors, friends. We need to understand exactly what happened." "And Lucy?" Alexander looked out the window again, watching the spot where his granddaughter had so cleverly evaded Richardson's men. "I'll handle Lucy personally. No more tests, no more disguises. It's time she learned the truth about who she is." As they left the cafe, Alexander caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. The past week had changed him, stripped away layers of cynicism he hadn't even realized he'd built. Lucy's unshakable kindness, so like her mother's, had reawakened something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. But first, he had to protect her. Richardson's involvement with the orphanage fire suggested something far more sinister than simple real estate manipulation. The senator's desperation to keep Lucy away from Alexander hinted at secrets that could destroy more than just property deals. "James," he called as the car pulled up, "take me back to the mansion. We have preparations to make." In his pocket, Alexander touched the silver locket he always carried, Sarah's locket, twin to the one Lucy wore. Soon, very soon, both lockets would be reunited, and with them the last remaining pieces of his family. Lucy knew something was different about this morning. The men in dark suits weren't the first strangers who had shown unusual interest in her lately, but they were certainly the most obvious. As she navigated the crowded sidewalks, her mind kept returning to the old man in the wheelchair. There had been something familiar about him, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite grasp. Finding a quiet alcove near the public library, she pulled out her treasured photograph. The woman's face was partially obscured, but Lucy had memorized every visible detail: the gentle curve of her smile, the way her hands cradled the baby, and most importantly, the silver necklace that matched the one Lucy wore. "Your mom must have loved you very much," Sister Mary had once told her, examining the necklace. "This is no ordinary piece of jewelry. Someone had this made specially." A shadow fell across the photograph and Lucy quickly tucked it away. Looking up, she found herself face to face with a well-dressed woman whose kind eyes reminded her of Sister Mary. "Hello, Lucy," the woman said softly. "My name is Margaret. I work for someone who very much wants to meet you." Lucy tensed, ready to run, but something in Margaret's manner made her pause. The woman wasn't trying to grab her or force her to do anything. Instead, she simply held out a business card and what looked like an old photograph. "Before you decide," Margaret continued, "he wanted you to see this." Lucy's hands trembled as she took the photo. It showed a teenage girl sitting at a piano, wearing a silver necklace identical to Lucy's. But it wasn't just the necklace that caught her attention. The girl's features, her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It was like looking at an older version of herself. Who? Lucy's voice cracked. Who is she? Her name was Sarah Wellington, Margaret answered gently. And she was wearing that same necklace you're wearing now. Lucy's hand went to her necklace instinctively. Wellington? Like the man who owns all the buildings? Yes, Alexander Wellington is Sarah's father, and Lucy, we have reason to believe he's your grandfather. The world seemed to tilt beneath Lucy's feet. Memories flashed through her mind, the old man in the wheelchair watching her, his familiar gestures, the way he spoke about his daughter who played piano. He was testing me, she whispered, realization dawning. All those days, pretending to be homeless. Margaret nodded. He needed to know if you had your mother's heart. And Lucy, you proved that and more. But why now? Why didn't he find me before? He didn't know about you, Margaret explained. Your mother. She kept you a secret. She was very young and afraid. But she was coming back for you, Lucy. We found the papers. She was going to tell him everything, but then Lucy understood the unspoken words. She had always known somehow that her mother was no longer in this world, but to learn she had been so close to having a family again. There's more you need to know, Margaret said urgently. You're in danger. There are people who don't want this truth to come out, people involved in what happened at St. Catherine's. The fire, Lucy whispered. She still had nightmares about that night, about Sister Mary rushing the children out as smoke filled the hallways. Yes, Mr. Wellington wants to protect you, but he needs you to trust him. Will you come with me just to talk? Lucy looked at the photograph again, at the mother she barely remembered. The silver necklace had been her only connection to her past, and now suddenly that past had a name, a face, a family. The man in the wheelchair, she said slowly. He's waiting to meet me, isn't he? Margaret smiled. No more disguises. Just a grandfather who wants to know his granddaughter. Lucy took a deep breath, touching her necklace one last time. She thought about all the nights she'd spent wondering about her family, all the times she'd wished for someone to belong to. And she thought about the kind old man who had tested her character, not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to be sure. Okay, she said finally. I'll come with you. As they walked to the waiting car, Lucy glanced back at her corner, one last time. The men in dark suits were still there watching, but for the first time in years she felt something she had almost forgotten, the feeling of being protected. Inside the car, Margaret handed her a small velvet box. Your grandfather wanted you to have this now. Lucy opened it to find another silver locket, identical to hers but slightly more worn. Inside was a photograph of a young woman holding a baby, the same photograph Lucy had carried for years, but this one was clear, undamaged. And now she could finally see her mother's face, smiling down at her with eyes full of love. Welcome home, Lucy Wellington, Margaret said softly as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the street corner that had been Lucy's world for so long. Ahead lay a new life, a family she never knew she had, and answers to questions she had carried in her heart since she could remember. The massive iron gates of the Wellington estate opened silently as Margaret's car approached. Lucy pressed her face against the window, eyes wide as she took in the sprawling mansion before her. The same building she had often admired from her street corner now loomed ahead, both magnificent and intimidating. Your mother grew up here, Margaret said softly, watching Lucy's reaction in the rearview mirror. She used to spend hours in the gardens, especially near the fountain. Lucy clutched both lockets in her hands, hers and her mother's, finally reunited after so many years. The weight of them felt like an anchor to a past she was just beginning to understand. As the car came to a stop at the mansion's entrance, she saw a familiar figure waiting at the top of the steps. Alexander Wellington stood tall and distinguished, no longer hunched in a wheelchair. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his suit impeccable, but his eyes, those were the same eyes that had watched her with such intensity from beneath his disguise. Now they held a mixture of hope and uncertainty as he waited for her. Take your time, Margaret encouraged as she opened the car door. This is a big moment for both of you. Lucy stepped out, her worn sneakers incongruous against the polished marble steps. For a moment, neither she nor Alexander moved, each studying the other without the barrier of pretense between them. "Hello, Lucy," Alexander finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for coming." Lucy touched her necklace, a gesture she had always done when nervous. She saw Alexander's eyes follow the movement, recognition flickering across his face. "You gave this to my mother," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Alexander descended 2 steps. "For her 16th birthday. She never took it off." He paused, struggling with his next words. "If I had known, and if she had told me about you." "Why didn't she?" The question that had haunted Lucy's dreams finally found voice. Alexander gestured to the door. "Perhaps we should talk inside. There's so much to tell you, and..." He glanced at the security, cameras scanning the perimeter. "We'll be safer there." Lucy hesitated for just a moment before climbing the steps. As she passed Alexander, she caught a familiar scent, the same cologne she had detected on the old man in the wheelchair. It was strange how such a small detail could confirm what her heart already knew. The mansion's interior was like something from a fairy tale, with soaring ceilings and grand staircases. But what caught Lucy's attention were the empty spaces. On the walls, lighter patches where pictures had once hung. "I took them down after Sarah." Alexander's voice trailed off. It was too painful to see her face every day. But now, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded photograph. "Now it's time to remember." The photo showed a young woman, Sarah, sitting at a grand piano that Lucy could see through a nearby doorway. She was laughing at the camera, her hand raised to brush away her hair in a gesture Lucy had made 1,000 times herself. "She was so young," Alexander said softly. "Too young to face everything alone. She was just starting college when she..." He took a deep breath. "When she found out about you, she was scared, confused, afraid I would be disappointed in her." "Would you have been?" Lucy asked, her voice small. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "No. God, no. I would have helped her, supported her, protected you both. That's why she was coming home, you know. She had finally decided to tell me the truth. She had started the paperwork to reclaim you from St. Catherine's." Lucy felt her own eyes welling up. "But then the accident happened." "Yes." Alexander's hand trembled as he reached out, stopping, just short of touching her shoulder. "And I lost her without ever knowing about you, without knowing I had a granddaughter who needed me." A sudden crash from outside made them both jump. Alexander moved instantly, positioning himself between Lucy and the windows. "Margaret!" he called sharply. Margaret appeared within seconds, along with 2 security guards. "Sir, Senator Richardson's men are at the gates. They're demanding to speak with you." Alexander's face hardened. "Get Lucy to the safe room now." "No!" Lucy grabbed his arm. "Please don't send me away. I just found you." The look Alexander gave her was filled with 5 years of lost love. "I'm not sending you away, sweetheart. I'm protecting you. There are things about the orphanage fire, about what really happened to St. Catherine's. Richardson was involved in something terrible, and he's afraid you might know something." "But I don't," Lucy protested. "I was just a child." "Sometimes what we know isn't as important as what others think we might know." Alexander knelt before her, finally allowing himself to touch her face gently. "Lucy, I've failed to protect. 1 daughter already. I won't fail you too. Please go with Margaret. I'll handle Richardson." Lucy looked into his eyes, her grandfather's eyes, and saw the same determination she had witnessed when he pretended to be helpless on the streets. He had tested her character then. Now she would trust his. "Promise you'll come get me." "After." Alexander smiled, and for the first time Lucy saw the warmth that Sarah must have grown up with. "I promise, my dear. We have years of catching up to do." As Margaret led her away, Lucy glanced back one last time. Alexander stood framed in the entrance hall, his bearing regal and protective. She thought about all the times she had wished for a family to protect her, to fight for her. Now, watching her grandfather prepare to face down her enemies, she realized some wishes do come true, just not always in the way we expect. Alexander Wellington stood in his study, watching through the window as Richardson's black SUVs lined up outside the gates. His security team had already activated all protective measures, but he knew this confrontation was inevitable. Behind him, Parker worked quietly at a laptop, gathering the last pieces of evidence they needed. "Sir," Parker called softly, "you should see this." On the screen was an email chain dating back 5 years, just before the St. Catherine's fire. The messages were between Richardson and several construction companies discussing plans for the property, plans dated months before the orphanage was destroyed. "They knew," Alexander said, his voice cold. "They planned it all along." Parker nodded grimly. "The fire inspector who changed his report. He just agreed to talk. Says Richardson's people pressured him, threatened his family." The intercom buzzed. "Sir, Senator Richardson is insisting on speaking with you. He says it's about Lucy's custody status." Alexander straightened his tie, a gesture that had always helped him prepare for battle. "Let him in. Parker, make sure everything's recording." Minutes later, Richardson strode into the study, his usual smooth confidence somewhat strained. "Alexander, this has gone far enough. Taking in a street child. What will the board think?" "She's my granddaughter, Robert." Alexander's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Sarah's daughter." Richardson's facade cracked slightly. "You can't prove that." "DNA doesn't lie, unlike fire inspectors under pressure." Alexander watched the color drain from Richardson's face. "Tell me, Robert, how long had you been planning to destroy St. Catherine's? Was it before or after you discovered the original land grant?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Alexander picked up a file from his desk. "Sister Mary kept excellent records, you know, including the original deed, showing that the land belonged to the church in perpetuity. The only way to break that covenant was if the orphanage ceased to exist. A troublesome detail for your development plans, wasn't it?" Richardson's hands clenched. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alexander." "No, Robert, the game is over." Alexander pressed a button on his desk, and screens around the room lit up, with documents, photographs, and email chains. Every piece of evidence about the fire, every threatened inspector, every falsified document. I have it all. The only question is, what am I going to do with it? What do you want? Richardson's voice was barely a whisper. "First, you're going to cease all interest in Lucy. No surveillance, no threats, no mysterious men in dark suits. Second, you're going to publicly support the rebuilding of St. Catherine's with full funding from your development committee. And third," Alexander leaned forward, his voice dropping dangerously low, "you're going to stay away from my family. You'd risk everything? Your reputation, your business relationships, all for one child?" Alexander's response was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Grandfather?" Both men turned to see Lucy standing there, Margaret hovering anxiously behind her. She had changed into clean clothes, simple but elegant attire that Margaret must have provided, and for a moment she looked so much like Sarah that Alexander's heart clenched. "Lucy, you should be in the safe room," he said gently, but Lucy's eyes were fixed on Richardson, recognition dawning on her face. "I remember you. You were at St. Catherine's the day before the fire. Sister Mary was upset after you left." Richardson's expression flickered between shock and fear. Lucy continued, her voice growing stronger. "She was crying. She said someone wanted to take away our home, but she wouldn't let them. She had important papers she was going to show." "The original deed," Alexander realized. "Sister Mary was going to expose your plans." Lucy nodded. "She put the papers in her special box, the one she always kept." She stopped, her eyes widening. "The one she kept in the chapel, the part that didn't burn." Alexander looked sharply at Parker, who was already typing frantically. "The chapel survived the fire. If those papers still exist—" "This is absurd," Richardson sputtered. "You can't possibly—" "Actually, we can." Parker turned his laptop around, showing a document request form. The chapel's contents were catalogued and stored by the diocese, including one locked box belonging to Sister Mary Catherine O'Malley. Richardson seemed to deflate before their eyes. Without another word, he walked to Alexander's desk and wrote something on a piece of paper. "My resignation from the development committee," he said, quietly, "and my full cooperation with any investigation." As security escorted Richardson out, Lucy moved to Alexander's side. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, marveling at how natural it felt. "I'm sorry you had to see that, my dear." Lucy leaned against him. "Sister Mary used to say that the truth always finds its way into the light. She sounds like a wise woman." Alexander looked down at his granddaughter, his miracle, his second chance. "I'd like to meet her someday, to thank her for taking care of you." "She'd like that." Lucy touched her necklace thoughtfully. Do you think Mom would be happy about us finding each other?" Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I think she orchestrated it all along." He touched the matching locket around Lucy's neck. "She made sure you had this, knowing that someday it would lead you back to family." Through the window, they watched Richardson's motorcade leave the property. The threat wasn't completely over. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, reporters to deal with. But looking at Lucy's reflection in the glass, seeing Sarah's features merged with his own, Alexander knew that everything would be all right. They had found each other against impossible odds, guided by a mother's love that transcended time and tragedy. And now, finally, they were home. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the ornate windows of Lucy's new bedroom, casting warm patterns across her bed. She lay awake, still adjusting to the softness of the mattress, so different from the hard surfaces she had grown accustomed to. A week had passed since the confrontation with Richardson, and each day brought new wonders and challenges. A gentle knock at the door preceded Margaret's entrance. "Good morning, Lucy. Your grandfather is waiting for you in the conservatory." Lucy smiled, remembering her first glimpse of that magical room. The grand piano, her mother's piano, stood centerpiece among flourishing plants and morning light. Alexander had shown her Sarah's old sheet music, preserved exactly as she had left it. "Is it time for the interview?" Lucy asked, sitting up. Margaret nodded, laying out a carefully chosen outfit. Mr. Wellington thought the conservatory would be the perfect setting, more personal than the formal study. The decision to go public with their story had been carefully considered. After Richardson's resignation made headlines, speculation had run wild. Alexander believed controlling the narrative was crucial to protecting Lucy from unwanted attention. Dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress that reminded her of Sarah's in the old photographs, Lucy made her way downstairs. She found Alexander sitting at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys without touching them. "Good morning, grandfather," she said softly. Alexander turned, his face lighting up the way it did every time he saw her. "Good morning, my dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than before." She touched the piano gently. "Do you play?" "No. That was your mother's gift." He smiled wistfully. "But perhaps you'd like to learn. Sarah always said music was the best way to express what words couldn't say." Lucy sat beside him on the bench, pressing one key experimentally. The clear note rang through the conservatory. "I'd like that." Alexander checked his watch. "The reporter will be here soon. Are you sure you're ready for this? Sister Mary always said that hiding the truth only gives it power over you." Lucy straightened her shoulders. "I want people to know who I am, who Mom was." The pride in Alexander's eyes made her heart swell. Over the past week, they had spent hours together sharing stories and memories. He told her about Sarah's childhood, her dreams, her laugh. In return, Lucy shared her memories of St. Catherine's, of Sister Mary's kindness, of the small acts of grace she had witnessed on the streets. "Mr. Wellington?" Margaret appeared at the doorway. "Ms. Chen from the Tribune has arrived." The reporter who entered was younger than Lucy expected, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. She set up her recording equipment with minimal fuss, then sat across from them. "Thank you both for agreeing to this interview," Ms. Chen began. "I know it's been a difficult journey." Alexander placed a protective hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Sometimes the most precious things in life come to us through difficult paths." The interview flowed naturally as they shared their story. Lucy described her life at St. Catherine's, carefully avoiding any mention of the fire's suspicious nature. Those details were part of the ongoing investigation. Alexander spoke about discovering Lucy's identity, his voice catching when he described recognizing Sarah's necklace. "What made you decide to test Lucy's character?" Ms. Chen asked. Alexander squeezed Lucy's shoulder gently. "After losing Sarah, I had become cynical. I needed to know if genuine kindness still existed in the world. Lucy didn't just prove it did. She showed me it could flourish even in the harshest conditions." "Like Mom's roses," Lucy said suddenly, remembering the garden she had seen from her window. "The ones that bloom even in winter." Miss Chen smiled. "The same roses engraved on your necklaces." Lucy touched her locket, a gesture mirrored by Alexander. "Mom knew what she was doing when she left this with me. She made sure I'd find my way home someday." The interview continued, touching on their plans for the future. Alexander spoke about the foundation they were establishing in Sarah's name, dedicated to helping orphaned children. Lucy shared her excitement about starting school, about learning piano, about having a family again. As Miss Chen packed up her equipment, she paused. "One last question, off the record. Lucy, what would you say to other children who are still waiting for their own miracle?" Lucy thought about her years on the street, about the unwavering kindness she had chosen to maintain despite everything. "I'd tell them that love leaves clues for us to follow. Sometimes they're as obvious as a silver necklace, and sometimes they're as subtle as a familiar gesture or a shared smile. But if you keep your heart open, eventually you'll find your way home." After the reporter left, Lucy and Alexander remained in the conservatory. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the roses in the garden glow like stained glass. "You're very wise, you know," Alexander said softly. "Sarah would be so proud of who you've become." Lucy leaned against his shoulder, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. "Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think we could visit Sister Mary soon? To thank her?" "Of course." Alexander kissed the top of her head. "We have a lifetime ahead of us to thank everyone who helped bring you back to me, and to make new memories of our own." The piano sat before them, its keys catching the morning light. Lucy pressed another note, then another, creating a simple melody. Alexander watched, seeing Sarah in every movement, every smile. Outside, the roses bloomed in the winter garden, resilient and beautiful, just like the granddaughter who had found her way home. The article about Lucy and Alexander appeared on a Sunday, accompanied by a photograph of them in the conservatory, matching lockets gleaming in the morning light. By Monday, the Wellington Mansion's gates were surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, all eager to catch a glimpse of the miraculous reunion. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked, adjusting Lucy's coat as they prepared to leave through a private exit. Today was special. They were finally going to visit Sister Mary at her new parish across town. Lucy nodded, clutching a carefully wrapped package. Inside was Sarah's favorite book of piano sheet music, which they had discovered in the attic. "Do you think she'll remember me?" "My dear, I doubt anyone who knows you could ever forget you." They traveled in a different car today, one less conspicuous than Alexander's usual Mercedes. James navigated carefully through back streets, avoiding the media attention their story had generated. Lucy watched the familiar city streets pass by, looking so different from this new perspective. The small church where Sister Mary now served was quiet, its modest garden reminding Lucy of the ones at St. Catherine's. As they approached the side entrance, a familiar figure in a nun's habit emerged. "Lucy," Sister Mary's voice quavered. "Oh, my precious child." Lucy ran forward, embracing the woman who had been her first real guardian. Sister Mary held her tight, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Look at you," she said, stepping back to study Lucy properly. "You're blooming like a rose in spring." Alexander approached slowly, respect evident in his bearing. "Sister Mary, I can never thank you enough for protecting my granddaughter." The nun's eyes were kind, but knowing. "Sarah made me promise to keep her safe. She visited once, you know, after leaving Lucy with us. She wanted to make sure her baby was well cared for, while she gathered the courage to tell you the truth." Inside Sister Mary's small office, Lucy presented the wrapped package. As the nun opened it, her eyes filled with fresh tears at the sight of Sarah's name written in girlish script on the cover. "She loved music so much," Sister Mary said softly. "Sometimes I would find Lucy humming those same melodies, though she couldn't have remembered hearing them." "Some things are carried in the heart," Alexander replied, watching his granddaughter explore the humble room. "Sister, there's something else we need to discuss. About the fire and the documents you saved." Sister Mary's expression grew serious. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Those papers survived because they needed to, not just to expose the truth about the fire, but to protect Lucy's future." She moved to a small filing cabinet, unlocking a drawer with a key she wore around her neck. "I've been waiting for the right time to share these." She withdrew a bundle of letters, held together with a faded ribbon. "Sarah wrote to Lucy every week, though she never sent them. She left them with me for safekeeping, along with—" Sister Mary paused, removing one final envelope. "This was meant for you, Mr. Wellington. Sarah wrote it the day before. Well, she wanted you to have it if anything ever happened to her." Alexander's hands shook as he accepted the envelope. Lucy moved to his side, offering silent support. As he opened the letter and began to read, "Dearest Dad," he read aloud, voice thick with emotion. "If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you in person. I'm so sorry for that. I want you to know that keeping Lucy a secret wasn't about trust. It was about my own fears and insecurities." The letter continued, Sarah's words painting a picture of a young woman struggling with impossible choices, desperate to protect both her child and her father's heart. She wrote of her plans to reclaim Lucy, of her hope that they could all be a family together. "I left my necklace with her," the letter concluded, "because I knew that someday it would lead her back to you. Love leaves clues for us to follow, Dad. I learned that from you. Please find her, please love her. She's the best of me, and I know she'll be the best of you too. All my love, Sarah." The office was silent except for quiet tears as the words settled around them. Sister Mary quietly excused herself, leaving grandfather and granddaughter to share this moment of connection with the woman they had both loved and lost. "You know what this means?" Lucy said finally, touching her necklace. "Mom never gave up on either of us. She believed we'd find each other." Alexander carefully folded the letter, tucking it close to his heart. "She was always wiser than I gave her credit for, just like you." Sister Mary returned with tea and cookies, and they spent the next hour sharing stories about Sarah, about Lucy's early years at St. Catherine's, about the strange and wonderful path that had led them back to each other. As they prepared to leave, Sister Mary pressed one final item into Lucy's hands, a small diary. "Your mother left this too. She wrote in it during the month she carried you. I think you're old enough now to understand what's in those pages." The drive home was quiet, both Lucy and Alexander lost in thoughts of Sarah, of choices made and unmade, of love that transcended time and tragedy. The diary sat in Lucy's lap, another piece of the puzzle that was her mother's life. "Grandfather," she asked as they approached the mansion, would you read it with me?" Alexander smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'd be honored. My dear, perhaps in the conservatory near her piano." Lucy nodded, clutching the diary that held her mother's thoughts, her dreams, her love. Together, they would discover another layer of Sarah's story, another thread connecting their hearts across time and space. The conservatory glowed with late afternoon light as Alexander and Lucy settled onto the piano bench, Sarah's diary between them. The leather-bound book was well worn, its pages filled with neat handwriting that spoke of careful thoughts and deep emotions. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked gently, watching his granddaughter's fingers trace the cover. Lucy nodded, opening to the first page. Sarah's familiar handwriting flowed across the paper, dated nearly 11 years ago. "Dear Diary, today I confirmed what I've suspected for weeks. I'm going to have a baby. My baby." The nurse at the clinic was kind, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. Another teenage pregnancy, another statistic. But she doesn't understand. This tiny life inside me is a miracle, even if it came at the wrong time, even if I'm terrified. Alexander's voice caught as he read the words aloud. Lucy leaned against him, offering comfort as they continued through the pages. Sarah's entries painted a vivid picture of her struggles, her hopes, her fears. "Dad would be so disappointed," one entry read. "Not because of the baby, he has the biggest heart of anyone I know, but because I didn't trust him enough to tell him. Every time he calls, I almost confess everything, but then I remember how much he's already lost, how hard he's worked to give me everything, and I just can't add to his burdens." Lucy wiped tears from her eyes. "She was trying to protect you, while I was trying to protect her," Alexander said softly. "We were both so focused on protecting each other that we ended up causing more pain." They turned another page, finding a sketch of a baby's face. Sarah had drawn it during her 6th month, imagining what her child might look like. Beneath it, she had written, "I think she'll have Dad's eyes. I hope she has his strength too, that quiet determination that built an empire but never forgot to read bedtime stories." The diary entries became more frequent as Sarah's due date approached. She wrote about choosing Lucy's name, about the dreams she had for her daughter's future. There were pressed flowers between some pages, roses from the garden she loved so much. "September 15th, Alexander read, his voice trembling. "Lucy was born today. She's perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and eyes that already seem to hold all the wisdom in the world. The nurses wanted to take her right away to the adoption center, but I needed these moments with her. I needed to memorize every detail of her face, every curl of her tiny fingers around mine. I gave her my necklace, Dad's special gift to me. Someday, it will lead her home." Lucy touched her necklace, feeling the weight of its history even more deeply now. She knew, even then, that we'd find each other. They continued reading as the sun slowly set, casting long shadows across the conservatory floor. Sarah's later entries spoke of her growing determination to reclaim her daughter, her plans to tell Alexander everything. "I've started the paperwork." The second to last entry read, "Next week I'm going to tell Dad everything. I found a little house near his with a garden perfect for Lucy to play in. I've even been practicing what to say. Dad, you're a grandfather, and she's amazing." The final entry was dated just 2 days before Sarah's accident. The page was tear-stained, the writing more hurried than her usual careful script. "I saw Lucy today at St. Catherine's. She's so beautiful, so full of light. Sister Mary lets me watch from the garden sometimes, though Lucy doesn't know who I am. Today she was sharing her snack with a younger child, and I saw Dad in her generous spirit. How could I have ever doubted that he would love her? Tomorrow I'm driving home. It's time for the truth, time for our family to be whole again." Alexander closed the diary gently, unable to read more. Lucy wrapped her arms around him, and they sat in silence as twilight filled the conservatory. The piano keys gleamed softly in the fading light, waiting. "Would you like to start your first lesson?" Alexander asked finally, wiping his eyes. I think Sarah would like that." Lucy placed her fingers on the keys, mimicking the position she had seen in photographs of her mother. "Can you tell me about her favorite song?" "It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata," Alexander said, his voice warming with memory. She said it reminded her of stars finding their way home. As the first hesitant notes filled the conservatory, both grandfather and granddaughter felt Sarah's presence around them, in the music, in the gathering darkness, in the love that had finally brought them together. Through her words, she had given them one final gift: understanding. Outside, the winter roses continued to bloom in the garden Sarah had loved so much. Their petals caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing like the hope that had never died, the love that had never faded, the family that had finally found its way back to each other. The morning paper arrived with headlines that shattered the peaceful routine Lucy and Alexander had begun to establish. "Wellington Air Legitimacy Questioned" blazed across the front page, accompanied by photographs of Lucy in her street clothes from just weeks ago. "I've already contacted our lawyers," Margaret announced, entering Alexander's study where he and Lucy were having breakfast. "The claims are baseless, but they'll still cause trouble," Alexander finished, his jaw tight with anger. The article questioned the convenience of Lucy's appearance, just as Alexander's lack of an heir had become public knowledge. It suggested the whole thing might be an elaborate scheme, Lucy set down her toast, appetite gone. They think I'm lying? No, sweetheart. Alexander moved to her side. They're just trying to sell newspapers. We have proof. The DNA tests. Sarah's letters, Sister Mary's testimony. Actually, Margaret interrupted gently, that's part of the problem. The DNA results haven't been officially released yet. And a knock at the door interrupted her. Parker entered, his expression grave. Sir, we have another situation. Carson Holdings is calling an emergency board meeting. They're questioning your fitness to lead, citing emotional decision-making and potential manipulation by outside forces. Alexander's face darkened. Richardson's old allies, no doubt. There's more, Parker continued. Someone's been talking to the press about Sarah's last year at college. They're painting a very different picture of events, suggesting she was troubled. No, Alexander's fist hit the desk. They will not tarnish her memory, not now, not ever. Lucy stood quietly, moving to the window. Below, she could see reporters gathering at the gates again. Their cameras flashed like hungry eyes, waiting to devour more of her story, more of her mother's memory. Perhaps, she began hesitantly, perhaps I should go away for a while, until things calm down. Absolutely not. Alexander's voice was firm. You are my granddaughter, Sarah's daughter, and a Wellington. We don't run from challenges. Margaret cleared her throat. There might be a way to address this directly. The Tribune has offered us a follow-up interview and... No more interviews, Alexander interrupted. No more trying to prove ourselves. To people who've already decided not to believe. We need something stronger. Lucy turned from the window, an idea forming. What about the diary? Mom's own words. Too personal, Alexander said softly. Those words were meant for us, not the world. But maybe, Lucy paused, touching her necklace thoughtfully. Maybe we could share just enough to show the truth. Not the private parts, but the parts that show her heart, her plans for us. Alexander studied his granddaughter's face, seeing Sarah's determination in her eyes. You're willing to share those memories? Mom wanted us to be a family, Lucy said firmly. She wouldn't want us to let anyone take that away. Parker spoke up from his corner. Sir, I've also found something interesting about those board members calling the meeting. Their connections to Richardson's development projects go deeper than we thought. Alexander's strategic mind began working. So they're not just questioning Lucy's legitimacy. They're trying to protect themselves, Parker confirmed. If your position is weakened, the investigation into the St. Catherine's fire might lose momentum. Lucy's eyes widened. So this isn't really about me at all? No, dear one, Alexander said gently. This is about power and money, as these things usually are, but they've made a serious miscalculation. What's that? A smile crossed Alexander's face, the same smile he had worn when facing down Richardson. They think attacking my family is my weakness. They don't understand that it's my strength. He pressed the intercom. James, bring the car around. Lucy and I have some visits to make. Visits? Margaret asked. First to Judge Harrison, to expedite the official DNA results. Then to the bank. It's time to show the board exactly how much support we have. And finally, he looked at Lucy with pride, to St. Catherine's old chapel. I think it's time. We recovered everything from Sister Mary's box, not just the property deeds. Lucy straightened her shoulders, remembering Sister Mary's words about truth finding its way to light. What can I do to help? Just be yourself, my dear. Alexander touched her cheek gently. Your mother's daughter, sharing her kindness with the world, that's more powerful than any legal document or business alliance. As they prepared to leave, Lucy took one last look at Sarah's diary, sitting safely on the piano. Her mother's words would stay private, precious memories for family, alone. But her mother's love, that they would share with the world, proving that some bonds couldn't be broken by doubt or distance or time. The roses in the garden caught the morning light, their petals as bright as hope. Lucy smiled, feeling stronger. Let them question. Let them doubt. The truth was in her heart, in her grandfather's eyes, in every note of her mother's piano music. And truth, like love, always found its way home. The old chapel of St. Catherine's stood like a sentinel among the ruins, its stone walls blackened but unbowed by the fire that had claimed the rest of the orphanage. Lucy and Alexander stood before its weathered doors, accompanied by Sister Mary, who held an ancient key in her trembling hands. "No one has entered since the fire," Sister Mary explained, fitting the key into the lock. "The diocese sealed it until the investigation was complete." The heavy door creaked open, releasing the scent of old wood and memories. Dust motes danced. In the shafts of light streaming through stained glass windows that had somehow survived the devastation. Lucy's footsteps echoed on the stone floor as she entered, her hand instinctively finding Alexander's. "The box," Sister Mary said, moving toward the altar. "I kept it hidden here." She knelt before a loose stone in the floor, her fingers finding invisible catches that released a small compartment. The metal box she withdrew was old but sturdy, its surface etched with the same rose pattern that adorned Lucy and Sarah's necklaces. Alexander's breath caught at the sight. "That's impossible," he whispered. "That box, it belonged to Sarah's mother." Sister Mary nodded. "Sarah brought it to me the day she left Lucy in our care. She said it was a family heirloom, that it would protect her daughter's future." With reverent care, Sister Mary opened the box. Inside, beneath the property deeds they had come for, lay a collection of items that told a story of love and foresight. Birth certificates, legal documents, and photographs that proved beyond doubt the connection between Sarah and Lucy. But it was a sealed envelope that caught Alexander's attention. His name was written on it in his late wife's handwriting, Eleanor, Sarah's mother, who had passed away when Sarah was just a child. "Eleanor knew," he said softly, opening the letter with shaking hands. Somehow she knew this might happen. The letter, dated years before Sarah's pregnancy, spoke of mother's intuition and family legacy. Eleanor had written it when Sarah was still a teenager, sensing perhaps that her daughter might one day need the protection of irrefutable documentation. "My dearest Alexander," he read aloud, his voice echoing in the chapel. "If you're reading this, it means our Sarah has faced choices that led her to use this box. I created it as a safeguard, a way to protect our family's future no matter what challenges might come. Inside, you'll find documents that cannot be disputed, proof of our lineage that reaches back generations." Lucy peered into the box, pulling out another photograph. This one showed 3 generations of Wellington women, each wearing the distinctive rose necklace. On the back was written, "The Wellington women, always finding their way home." "There's more," Sister Mary said, reaching deeper into the box. She withdrew a sealed envelope marked "Legal Documentation." Inside were notarized statements, DNA test results from Sarah's pregnancy, and official hospital records, all carefully preserved and legally certified. Sarah didn't just leave. "You with a necklace," Alexander realized, looking at his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. "She left you with an ironclad proof of your heritage. She and Eleanor both made sure you would be protected." Lucy touched the rose pattern on the box. "They knew someone might try to question my place in the family." "Wellington women have always been forward-thinking," Sister Mary said with a smile. "Your grandmother Eleanor established several legal precedents protecting female inheritance rights, and Sarah, she was her mother's daughter." As they carefully documented and photographed each item in the box, Alexander's phone buzzed with messages from his lawyers. The board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and his opponents were gathering their forces. "Let them come," he said firmly, watching Lucy examine the family photographs. "We have something they don't understand." "What's that?" Lucy asked, looking up. "The strength of Wellington women," he replied, touching Eleanor's letter. "Your grandmother knew it, your mother proved it, and you, my dear, embody it." Sister Mary began gathering the documents they would need, her efficient movements betraying years of protecting precious things. "The diocese will certify everything," she assured them. "Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence." As they prepared to leave, Lucy paused before the altar. Sunlight through the stained glass cast colored patterns across her face, making her look momentarily like the child in the old photographs, like Sarah in her youth, like Eleanor in her strength. "Mom knew we'd need this place," she said softly. That's why she chose St. Catherine's, not just because of Sister Mary's kindness, but because of this chapel, this box, this sanctuary. Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Your mother and grandmother created a path for you to follow. All we had to do was trust in their love." Outside, their car waited to take them back to face the challenges ahead. But now they carried with them more than just documents and photographs. They carried the wisdom of Eleanor, the love of Sarah, and the unshakable proof that Lucy was exactly where she belonged, in the heart of the Wellington family. The chapel stood silent behind them, its ancient stones keeping watch over newer secrets. Inside, the box that had protected Lucy's future lay empty, its purpose fulfilled. But the rose pattern etched on its surface remained, a testament to the Wellington women who had ensured that love would always find its way home. The Wellington Enterprises boardroom hummed with tension as Alexander and Lucy entered. Board members shifted in their leather chairs, some avoiding eye contact, others watching with barely concealed hostility. At the head of the table, Alexander took his place with quiet dignity, Lucy seated confidently at his right. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership, "I understand there are concerns about recent developments in my family life." Gregory Carson, Richardson's longtime ally, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Alexander, this goes beyond family matters. The company's stability is precisely why we're here," Alexander interrupted smoothly. He opened the leather portfolio before him, removing a stack of documents. "I have here the complete documentation of my granddaughter's identity, certified by both legal and medical authorities." As copies were distributed, Lucy watched the board members' faces. Some showed surprise, others discomfort, and a few, those she suspected were truly behind this challenge, showed the first signs of worry. "These records," Alexander continued, "include DNA certification, birth records, and a rather interesting collection of documents preserved by my late wife, Eleanor Wellington." The mention of Eleanor's name caused several of the older board members to sit up straighter. She had been a formidable presence in the company's early days, helping Alexander build his empire while fighting for women's places in corporate leadership. "Additionally," Alexander's voice took on a harder edge, "we have documentation regarding certain real estate developments, particularly concerning the St. Catherine's orphanage property." Carson's face paled slightly. "That matter has been settled." "Has it?" Lucy spoke for the first time, her clear voice carrying across the room. "Sister Mary's box contained more than just my family records. It also held evidence of multiple attempts to pressure the orphanage into selling, dating back years before the fire." A murmur ran through the board members. Lucy continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My mother discovered this when she was investigating safe places to leave me. That's why she chose St. Catherine's, not just for Sister Mary's kindness, but because she knew the truth would be protected there." Alexander watched his granddaughter with pride as she addressed the board with grace and conviction. She had insisted on speaking, on facing these challenges directly, rather than hiding behind lawyers and documents. "I understand your concerns," Lucy said, looking each board member in the eye. "You worry about stability, about the future of this company, but isn't that exactly what family legacy is about? My grandmother Eleanor helped build this company. My mother Sarah was raised understanding its values, and She touched her necklace, drawing strength from it. "I may have grown up on the streets, but I learned something valuable there. Integrity isn't about where you live. It's about who you choose to be." One of the older board members, Margaret Chen, spoke up. "I knew Eleanor," she said quietly. "I see her strength in you, young lady, and Sarah's heart." Alexander seized the moment. "I've also taken the liberty of having our legal team prepare a complete analysis of the company's position." He distributed another set of documents. "You'll find that since Lucy's arrival, our public approval ratings have increased by 30%. The Wellington Foundation's new initiatives for orphaned children have attracted positive attention and new investors. Far from destabilizing the company, my granddaughter's presence has strengthened our position in ways Richardson's allies never considered." The mention of Richardson caused several board members to shift uncomfortably. Alexander pressed his advantage. The question before us isn't really about Lucy's legitimacy. We've proven that beyond any doubt. It's about whether this board will stand with the Wellington family's legacy of integrity and innovation, or bow to pressure from those whose interests lie elsewhere. Lucy watched as the mood in the room shifted. The documents from Eleanor's box were being examined with increasing interest, while Carson and his allies looked increasingly isolated. "I move to dismiss this challenge to Alexander Wellington's leadership," Margaret Chen announced firmly. "And I further move to formally recognize Lucy Wellington as his heir and a future member of this board." The vote that followed was decisive. Carson and 2 others abstained, but the majority stood firmly with Alexander and Lucy. As the board members filed out, several stopped to introduce themselves to Lucy properly, no longer seeing her as a threat, but as the future of the company they had helped build. When they were finally alone, Alexander turned to his granddaughter. "You did wonderfully, my dear. Your mother would be so proud." Lucy smiled, feeling the weight of the day's tension finally lifting. "I just told the truth. Like Sister Mary always said, the truth stands on its own." Indeed it does. Alexander gathered their documents, carefully returning Eleanor's letter to his portfolio. "And now that this challenge is behind us, we can focus on more important things." "Like my piano lessons?" Lucy asked with a grin. Alexander laughed, the sound echoing in the empty boardroom. "Like being a family. The rest, the company, the foundation, all of it, that's just the legacy we'll build together." As they left the boardroom, Lucy paused to look at the portraits lining the walls, generations of Wellington leaders, including Eleanor's commanding presence and Sarah's gentle smile. Soon she knew her own portrait would join them, but more importantly, she would continue their legacy of strength, integrity, and love. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the rose pattern on her necklace. In its light, Lucy could almost imagine she saw her mother and grandmother smiling down at her, their faith in her future finally fulfilled. The weeks following the board meeting brought changes to the Wellington mansion that no one could have predicted. The once silent halls now rang with the sound of Lucy's piano practice, her determined efforts to master Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filling the conservatory each morning. Today was special, though. Lucy sat at her mother's piano, fingers hovering over the keys as she prepared to play for an audience for the first time. The conservatory had been transformed, filled with carefully selected guests who had been part of her journey. Sister Mary, Margaret, James, Parker, and even Mr. Phillips, the hot dog vendor who had shown her kindness during her days on the street. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked softly, standing beside the piano just as he had done so many times for Sarah. Lucy nodded, touching her necklace for luck. The piece she had chosen was simple but meaningful, a lullaby that Sarah had apparently sung to her as a baby, one that Sister Mary remembered hearing through the nursery windows at St. Catherine's. As her fingers found the first notes, Lucy felt a connection to her mother stronger than ever before. The melody floated through the conservatory, touching everyone present with its gentle grace. Sister Mary wiped tears from her eyes, remembering the young mother who had trusted her with her most precious gift. When the last note faded, the small audience applauded warmly, but it was Alexander's proud smile that meant the most to Lucy. He had supported her through countless hours of practice, sharing stories of Sarah's own musical journey as Lucy worked to find her way with the instrument. "There's something else we'd like to share with you all," Alexander announced, helping Lucy up from the piano bench. "Lucy and I have been working on a project, something to honor both Sarah's memory and the place that protected her daughter." Together, they unveiled architectural plans displayed on an easel. The drawings showed a beautiful new building, rising from St. Catherine's old foundations, a modern facility that would combine an orphanage with a music school. "The Sarah Wellington Memorial Home for Children," Lucy explained, her voice clear and confident. "A place where every child will have the chance to discover their talents, just like Mom did with music." Sister Mary approached the plans, her hand trembling as she traced the design. "The chapel will remain exactly as it is," Alexander assured her. A reminder that some things are meant to be preserved. Mr. Phillips studied the plans with interest. "Is that a community garden I see?" Lucy smiled. "Yes, We want to teach the children about growing their own food, about sharing with others. Just like you taught me with your extra hot dogs." The old vendor blushed, surprised to be remembered so specifically. Margaret stepped forward, businesslike as always, but with suspiciously bright eyes. "The foundation's paperwork is complete. Construction can begin next month." As their guests mingled, discussing the plans and sharing memories, Lucy found herself drawn to the windows overlooking the garden. The winter roses were blooming more abundantly than ever, as if nature itself approved of their plans. "Sarah would love this," Alexander said, joining her at the window. "Not just the music or the building, but the way you've brought people together. That was always her gift too." Lucy leaned against him, accepting the embrace that had become so natural. "I've been thinking about what she wrote in her diary, about wanting to give me everything she had, especially your love." "She succeeded," Alexander said softly, "in ways she couldn't have imagined." The sound of Sister Mary beginning a hymn on the piano drew their attention back to the room. The elderly nun's playing was simple but heartfelt, and soon others joined in singing. A spontaneous celebration of life, love, and family found. "Grandfather," Lucy said suddenly, "do you think we could do something else too, for the children who will live at the new home?" "What did you have in mind?" "A necklace, not exactly like ours, but something with the same rose pattern. So they know they're part of a legacy too, that someone cares about their future." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "Your mother once said something similar. She believed every child deserved to have a piece of beauty to hold on to." As the music filled the conservatory, Lucy watched their guests. This unlikely family brought together by circumstance and choice. Mr. Phillips was sharing stories with James about Lucy's clever strategies for helping other street children. Margaret and Parker were discussing programs for the new home with Sister Mary, their different perspectives creating a richer vision. The afternoon sun caught the rose patterns on Lucy's necklace, casting tiny reflections across the room. In that moment, she felt the presence of all the Wellington women who had come before her, Eleanor with her foresight, Sarah with her courage, and now herself, combining their legacies into something new. "We should include a library too," she suggested, still watching the scene before them, with comfortable chairs where children can read and dream. "Like the ones in Sarah's old room?" Alexander asked with a knowing smile. "Exactly. Because sometimes dreams do come true, sometimes love finds a way home." The hymn ended, but its echoes seemed to linger in the conservatory, mingling with the memories of Sarah's playing, with the hopes for future children who would find sanctuary in the home they were building, with the love that had brought a lonely businessman and a street-smart little girl together against all odds. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the groundbreaking ceremony for the Sarah Wellington Memorial Home for Children. The old St. Catherine's site had been cleared, its foundations carefully preserved where possible. Today, the empty ground was filled with people gathered to witness the beginning of something new. Lucy stood at the podium, her navy blue dress, matching Alexander's suit, their matching rose necklaces catching the morning light. The crowd before them included city officials, business leaders, and most importantly, a group of children from local orphanages who would be among the first residents of the new home. "My mother believed in second chances," Lucy began, her voice clear and strong. She believed in the power of love to find its way home no matter how long the journey. "This home isn't just about providing shelter, it's about creating possibilities." Alexander watched his granddaughter with pride as she addressed the crowd. Gone was the hesitant street child. In her place stood a young lady who combined Sarah's compassion with Eleanor's strength. Yet she had something uniquely her own too, a wisdom earned through hardship, but unspoiled by bitterness. "Each child who comes here will receive not just care and education," Lucy continued, "but a chance to discover their gifts. Whether it's music, art, science, or something else entirely, we want them to know that their dreams matter." In the front row, Sister Mary nodded approvingly, her eyes bright with tears. Beside her sat Mr. Phillips, wearing a new suit that Lucy had insisted on giving him. He would be managing the home's culinary program, teaching children about food, nutrition, and the importance of sharing. But most importantly, Lucy said, touching her necklace. "Each child will receive one of these." She held up a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pendant bearing the Wellington rose pattern, sized for a child. "This necklace led me home. Now we want every child here to know they have a home too, whether they stay for a short time or grow up with us." The first shovels of earth were turned by Lucy and Alexander together, their movements synchronized as if they had been doing this all their lives. As cameras flashed and applause rang out, Lucy caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, the young reporter, Ms. Chen, who had first shared their story with the world. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over refreshments, Ms. Chen approached them. "May I ask one question? Not for publication, just for myself." "Of course," Lucy smiled. "After everything, the streets, the separation, the challenges, what made you keep believing in happy endings?" Lucy exchanged a glance with Alexander before answering. "It wasn't about believing in happy endings. It was about believing in love. Mom believed in it enough to leave clues for me to follow. Grandfather believed in it enough to test his own cynicism. And I believed in it enough to keep sharing what little I had, even when I had nothing." The reporter nodded thoughtfully, but Alexander added something else. "Love isn't just an ending, happy or otherwise. It's a beginning. Every day with Lucy is a new beginning." Later, as the crowd thinned, Lucy and Alexander walked the perimeter of what would soon be the new home's garden. The architect had incorporated Eleanor's rose pattern into the walkways, creating a subtle reminder of the Wellington legacy beneath every step. "I've been thinking," Lucy said, pausing near where the music room would be built, "about Mom's diary, about how she wanted to tell you everything. What about it? Maybe we could start a new tradition. Each child who comes here could have their own diary, a place to write their hopes, their dreams, their truth, and when they're ready, they can share it with someone they trust." Alexander smiled, seeing Eleanor's practical wisdom and Sarah's emotional intelligence combined in his granddaughter's suggestion. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We could keep them in the library in a special section." "Like a library of hopes," Lucy mused, watching the construction crews begin their work. Mom would like that. The spring breeze carried the scent of newly turned earth and fresh possibilities. Soon these grounds would echo with children's laughter, with music practice, with stories being shared. The Wellington legacy was transforming from business success to something far more precious, a legacy of love, hope, and second chances. "You know," Alexander said softly, "when I first saw you on that street corner, I thought I was testing your character, but really you were teaching me about mine." Lucy squeezed his hand. "We found each other because we were both looking for the same thing. Family." Above them, clouds parted to reveal a perfect spring sky. The construction site hummed with activity, each sound a promise of the future being built. And in the garden of the Wellington mansion, the roses Sarah had loved so much bloomed on, their petals carrying the message she had believed in all along, that love, like flowers, could bloom even in the most unexpected places. 1 year had passed since the groundbreaking ceremony, and the Sarah Wellington Memorial Home for Children stood complete, its modern architecture harmoniously blending with the preserved chapel. Today marked its official opening, and Lucy stood in what would be her new office, adjusting the nameplate on her desk, Lucy Wellington, Junior Director. At 13, she was certainly the youngest director of any institution in the city, but Alexander had insisted that her experience made her uniquely qualified to understand the children's needs. Besides, she would be working alongside sister Mary, who had agreed to come out of retirement to help establish the home's founding principles. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked from the doorway. "The first children will be arriving soon." Lucy nodded, touching her necklace, a gesture that had become both comfort and connection. Through the window she could see the gardens, where Mr. Phillips was setting up a welcome celebration, complete with his famous hot dogs and fresh vegetables from their new community garden. The first group of children arrived in small buses, their faces pressed against windows as they took in their new home. Lucy and Alexander stood at the entrance, ready to welcome each one personally. Sister Mary waited inside, where each child would receive their own rose pendant and diary. "Welcome to your new home," Lucy said warmly as the first child, a small girl named Emma, stepped off the bus. The girl clutched a worn teddy bear, reminding Lucy of her own first day at St. Catherine's. "Is it true?" Emma asked shyly. "That you used to live on the streets?" Lucy knelt down to the girl's level. "Yes, it is, but I learned something important during that time, that love can find you anywhere if you keep your heart open." As more children arrived, Lucy noticed how they instinctively gravitated toward different areas, some to the music room where a piano waited, others to the art studio with its wall of windows, and still others to the garden where Mr. Phillips was already teaching them about the vegetables they would grow. Margaret efficiently coordinated the arrivals, her clipboard containing detailed information about each child's background and needs. Parker, who had taken on the role of security director, ensured every arrival was properly documented and safe. In the library, Sister Mary presented each child with their welcome package. The diaries were beautiful, bound in soft leather with the rose pattern embossed on the cover. "These are your private thoughts," she explained, "but whenever you're ready to share them, we'll be here to listen." Alexander watched it all with quiet satisfaction, seeing how his granddaughter moved among the children with natural grace and understanding. She had insisted on interviewing every staff member personally, ensuring they shared the home's vision of nurturing not just bodies, but dreams. As the day progressed, Lucy found herself drawn to the chapel. Inside, she lit a candle and sat in the same pew where she and Alexander had discovered Eleanor's box of documents. The stained glass cast familiar patterns of light across the floor. "I wish you could see this, Mum," she whispered. "We're helping other children find their way home, just like I found mine." A soft sound made her turn. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching her new diary. "Miss Wellington, could you help me write my first entry?" Lucy smiled, patting the space beside her. "Of course, and please call me Lucy." As they sat together in the chapel's gentle light, Lucy helped Emma find words for her hopes and fears. The girl's teddy bear sat between them, a silent witness to the beginning of her new story. Outside, the sound of children's laughter mingled with piano music, drifting from the practice rooms. In the garden, Mr. Phillips was teaching a group of enthusiastic helpers how to plant tomato seedlings. Sister Mary's voice could be heard leading a tour explaining the home's history and vision. Alexander appeared in the chapel doorway, watching his granddaughter help Emma with her diary. The scene brought tears to his eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of wonder at how life could come, full circle in the most beautiful ways. "Grandfather," Lucy called, noticing him, "Emma here has a talent for poetry. Would you like to hear what she's written?" As Alexander joined them in the pew, Emma shyly read her words about new beginnings and found families. Her simple verses captured exactly what they had hoped to create here, a place where every child could discover their gifts, their voice, their path home. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass, creating a rainbow of colors that seemed to dance around them. In that moment, Lucy felt the presence of all the love that had brought them to this point: Eleanor's foresight, Sarah's courage, Alexander's transformation, and her own journey from street corner to sanctuary. Each child who entered these doors would carry their own story, their own hopes, their own dreams. And just as Lucy had found her way home through the clues love had left for her to follow, these children would find their own paths, guided by the legacy of love that the Wellington family had built. As evening approached on that momentous first day, Lucy sat at her mother's piano in the conservatory of the Wellington mansion. The home's opening had been a tremendous success, with 25 children now settled into their new rooms, each wearing their rose pendants, each beginning their own stories in their new diaries. Alexander entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, a tradition they had started during Lucy's piano lessons. "Quite a day," he said, setting her cup on the piano. "I keep thinking about Mom," Lucy admitted, her fingers tracing the piano keys without pressing them. "About how she must have sat here planning her future, never knowing how it would all turn out." "She would be so proud of you," Alexander said, sitting beside her on the bench. "Not just for the home, but for who you've become." Lucy took a sip of hot chocolate, letting the warm sweetness comfort her. "I saw something today that reminded me of her diary entries. Emma writing in her new journal. She had the same look Mum described, of having so many feelings to express and finally finding a way to share them." Through the conservatory windows, they could see the garden where Sarah had spent so many hours. The roses were in full bloom, their petals catching the last rays of sunlight. On the wall hung a new portrait, Lucy and Alexander together, their matching necklaces clearly visible, their smiles genuine and warm. "There's something I've been wanting to give you," Alexander said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, similar to the ones they had given the children that day, but older. This belonged to Eleanor. She wore it on her wedding day. Inside was a ring bearing the same rose pattern as their necklaces. "It's meant to be passed down," Alexander explained, "from Wellington woman to Wellington woman." Sarah would have received it on her 21st birthday, but his voice caught slightly. Lucy carefully lifted the ring, watching how it caught the light. "It's beautiful." "It's more than just jewelry," Alexander continued. "It's a reminder of who you are and what you carry forward. Eleanor's strength, Sarah's compassion, and your own remarkable spirit." As Lucy slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, the piano keys before her seemed to beckon. She began to play the lullaby she had performed at the private concert, but this time it felt different, richer, more confident, as if all the love and history behind her were flowing through the music. "You know," she said between notes, "when I was living on the street I used to make up stories about my family, but none of them came close to the truth." Alexander smiled. "And what is the truth?" "That love leaves clues for us to follow. That family isn't just about blood or names or inheritances. It's about the choices we make, the kindness we share, the legacy we build together." The music swelled softly, filling the conservatory with warmth. Outside, the garden lights began to twinkle on, making the roses glow like stars fallen to earth. In the distance, they could see the lights of the new home, where 25 children were beginning their own journeys of discovery and hope. "I've been thinking," Lucy said, finishing the lullaby with a gentle flourish, "about what to write in my own diary tonight." "Oh?" "I want to write about today, about the children's faces when they received their necklaces, about Emma's poetry and Mr. Phillips's garden lessons, about how Sister Mary cried when she saw the chapel full of candles. She touched her necklace, then her new ring. About how love doesn't just find its way home, it builds new homes for others to find." Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together they watched the evening settle over their garden. The portrait on the wall caught the last light, showing not just a grandfather and granddaughter, but a family legacy renewed and strengthened. In the quiet of the conservatory, surrounded by the echoes of music and memory, Lucy felt the presence of all the Wellington women who had come before her. Eleanor, who had created safeguards for future generations. Sarah, who had protected her daughter with such fierce love. And now herself, carrying their legacy forward in ways none of them could have imagined. "Ready to go home?" Alexander asked softly. Lucy smiled, gathering her music sheets. "I am home, grandfather. I've been home ever since you sat in that wheelchair, on my corner, testing my kindness while I was unknowingly testing yours." Together they walked through the mansion that had once felt so empty to Alexander and now buzzed with life and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the home, new children to welcome, new stories to begin. But tonight, in the peaceful evening, they were simply family, found, restored, and flourishing like roses in an eternal spring. 6 months after the Sarah Wellington Memorial Home opened its doors, Lucy stood backstage in the newly built auditorium, her heart racing with anticipation. Tonight was the home's first musical showcase, featuring performances by children who had discovered their love for music in these very halls. Emma, now blossoming into a confident young artist, would be performing an original composition, a piece she had written about finding her voice through poetry and music. Other children would share their talents too, each one wearing their rose pendant proudly as they took the stage. "Nervous?" Alexander asked, appearing beside her with a reassuring smile. "A little," Lucy admitted. "I want everything to be perfect for them, like Mum would have wanted. The auditorium was filled with an eclectic mix of guests, board members from Wellington Enterprises, local families interested in adoption, Sister Mary's fellow nuns, and even some of Lucy's old friends from the streets whom she had helped find their way to better lives. Mr. Phillips had outdone himself with the reception planned for after the show, working with some of the children who had shown interest in culinary arts. The garden, now lush with vegetables and flowers, had provided many of the ingredients they would use. As Lucy peeked through the curtain, she saw Margaret efficiently organizing the last-minute details, while Parker ensured everything remained secure and comfortable for their guests. The sight of her extended family working together to support these children's dreams brought tears to her eyes. "Look who's here," Alexander whispered, pointing to a figure slipping quietly into a back-row seat. It was Richardson, recently released from his house arrest after cooperating fully with authorities. He had written to Lucy, expressing genuine remorse and asking to witness the positive changes his confession had helped make possible. Lucy had surprised many by responding with forgiveness, explaining that she had learned the power of second chances firsthand. She had even invited him to tonight's performance, believing that witnessing children flourishing might help heal whatever had hardened his heart. The lights dimmed, and Lucy took her place at the piano. She would open the show with the lullaby. That had become the home's unofficial anthem before introducing each young performer. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt Sarah's presence stronger than ever. Emma's performance moved many to tears, her young voice carrying the weight of experience beyond her years as she sang about stars finding their way home. Other children followed, each performance a testament to the healing power of art and love. During the intermission, Lucy found Richardson standing before the memorial wall they had created in the lobby. It displayed photographs of Sarah, quotes from her diary, and the story of how her love had created this sanctuary for other children. "I never knew," he said softly, not turning around. "When I was focused on property values and development deals, I never saw the lives I was affecting. But watching these children tonight, sometimes we need to lose our way before we can find it again," Lucy replied, thinking of her own journey. "The important thing is what we choose to do once we understand." Richardson nodded, then reached into his jacket. "I found this in my old files. I think it belongs here." He handed her a photograph, Sarah standing outside St. Catherine's, clearly pregnant, her face glowing with love as she touched her silver necklace. Lucy's hand trembled as she accepted the image. "Thank you," she whispered, already planning where it would fit on the memorial wall. The second half of the show began with a surprise, a video montage of the home's first 6 months, set to a piano piece that Lucy had composed herself. The footage showed children discovering their talents, sharing meals in the garden, writing in their diaries, and finding their place in this new family. As the evening drew to a close, all the children gathered on stage for a final song. Lucy joined them at the piano, leading them in a piece that incorporated elements of Sarah's lullaby, with new melodies contributed by the children themselves. Looking out at the audience, Lucy saw not just wealthy donors and community leaders, but a tapestry of lives interwoven by love and chance. She saw Sister Mary wiping tears from her eyes, Mr. Phillips beaming with pride at his culinary students, and Alexander, her grandfather, her anchor, watching it all with the contentment of a man who had found his way home. The roses from their garden decorated the stage, their petals catching the spotlight like stars. Each bloom seemed to represent a different story, of loss and finding, of healing and hope, of love that never gave up. As the final notes faded, Lucy realized that this was more than just a showcase of talent. It was a celebration of transformation, of an old man's heart softened by a child's kindness, of a street girl who became a beacon of hope, of a family legacy that grew to embrace all who needed its shelter. The applause that filled the auditorium was more than approval. It was a recognition of the miracle they had all witnessed, the miracle of love finding its way home again and again in endless variations of the same beautiful song. The morning after the showcase, Lucy sat in the chapel surrounded by the gentle light filtering through the stained glass windows. She held Sarah's diary in one hand and her own in the other, their pages filled with different generations of hopes and dreams. She had started a new tradition of writing letters to her mother, sharing the daily miracles she witnessed at the home. Today's entry felt particularly significant after the previous night's success. "Dear Mom," she wrote, "last night I finally understood what you meant in your diary, about music being a language of the heart. I watched children who had been silent find their voices, who had been lost find their way just like I did. Your love created ripples that keep spreading, touching more lives than you could have imagined." A soft knock interrupted her writing. Alexander stood in the doorway, holding a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I thought I might find you here," he said, joining her in the pew. "I was telling Mum about the showcase," Lucy explained, showing him her diary. "About how Emma's performance reminded me of her diary entries about finding the courage to follow her heart." Alexander smiled, running his fingers over the rose pattern on the diary's cover. Sarah always believed in the power of words to heal, to connect, to transform. Just like Eleanor believed in creating safe harbors for future generations. He handed her the package. "Speaking of which," Lucy carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound book similar to their diaries, but older. "Eleanor's journal," Alexander explained. "She wrote it while she was helping me build the company, documenting her dreams for the Wellington legacy. I think it's time for you to read it." Opening the journal with reverent hands, Lucy found herself looking at 3 generations of Wellington, women's thoughts. Eleanor's elegant script filled the early pages with visions of a future where business success would serve a greater purpose. Later entries showed her growing awareness of the need to protect future generations, leading to her creation of the rose box that had preserved Lucy's heritage. "There's something else," Alexander said, pulling a letter from his pocket. "The board approved it this morning. The Wellington Foundation is expanding. We're going to build more homes like this one in other cities where children need safe harbors." Lucy's eyes filled with tears as she read the proposal. Each new home would follow the model they had created here, combining education and nurturing with a focus on helping children discover their unique gifts. "And look at the name they'll carry," Alexander pointed to the letterhead. "The Lucy Wellington Centers for Creative Growth," she read aloud, her voice catching. "But why my name?" "Because you proved that the greatest legacy isn't built with money or power, but with love and understanding. These centers will carry your story, our story, forward, showing other lost children that they can find their way home too." Through the chapel windows, they could see children gathering in the garden for Mr. Phillips's morning lessons. Emma was there, helping younger children plant new seedlings, her rose pendant catching the sunlight as she moved. "I've been thinking," Lucy said, touching her own necklace, "about all the ways love leaves clues for us to follow. Eleanor left us her wisdom and foresight. Mom left us her courage and compassion. And now you're leaving your own legacy," Alexander finished. "Teaching others what you learned. That kindness is a choice we can make even in our darkest moments. That family is something we can build together. That love always finds a way home." They sat together in the chapel that had preserved so many secrets, now filled with the promise of new beginnings. Outside, the garden bloomed with endless possibility, each flower a testament to the care and attention the children gave it. Lucy opened her diary again, adding a final thought to her letter to Sarah. "Mom, your love was like a seed planted in the perfect soil. It grew into something beautiful, not just for me, but for so many others. Every child who finds their way here carries a piece of your dream forward. Every rose that blooms in our garden reflects the love that brought me home to Grandfather. And every note of music that fills these halls echoes with the song you started in my heart." Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she wrote, their matching necklaces catching the light from the stained glass windows. In that moment, surrounded by the legacy of 3 generations of Wellington women, they felt the perfect completeness of their journey. The morning sun streamed through the chapel windows, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. Outside, children's laughter mingled with the sound of Emma beginning her morning piano practice. New stories were starting, new dreams were blooming, and love was finding its way home again and again in an eternal spring of hope and possibility. On the evening of Lucy's 14th birthday, the Wellington mansion buzzed with an energy that would have been unimaginable just 2 years ago. The once silent halls echoed with music and laughter as children from the home joined in the celebration, each wearing their rose pendants and carrying stories written in their cherished diaries. Alexander had transformed the conservatory into a magical space, with tiny lights twinkling among the plants like the stars that had guided Lucy home. Emma, now a confident young musician, played soft melodies on Sarah's piano while other children shared poetry and songs they had written for the occasion. "Miss Lucy," called one of the younger children, Tommy, tugging at her dress, "will you tell us the story again, about how you and Mr. Wellington found each other?" Lucy smiled, gathering the children around her in what had become a favorite tradition. They settled on cushions near the piano, their faces eager and bright. Even the older children, who had heard the tale many times, drew closer. "Once upon a time," she began, touching her necklace, "there was a very lonely man who had lost faith in kindness, and a little girl who had nothing but kindness to give." As she told their story, Lucy watched the children's reactions, their gasps at the revelations, their smiles at the moments of connection, their tears at the tender parts. Each child wore their own rose pendant, a symbol of belonging to this extended family that love had built. Sister Mary sat in a comfortable chair nearby, her aging face peaceful as she watched the scene unfold. Mr. Phillips stood at the refreshment table he had prepared, proudly serving treats made with vegetables from their garden. Margaret and Parker, now married after finding love through their work at the home, sat hand in hand, their own rose pendants matching the ones they had helped design for the children. Alexander watched it all from his favorite spot near the windows, where the roses bloomed year-round in the garden Sarah had loved. The past 2 years had transformed him as much as they had transformed Lucy. His business empire now served a greater purpose, creating sanctuaries for children across the country. As Lucy finished the story, Emma began playing the lullaby that had become their anthem. The children joined in singing, their young voices filling the conservatory with hope. Each of them had their own story of finding their way to this family, of discovering their gifts, of learning to trust in love again. "Grandfather," Lucy said softly, joining Alexander by the window, "I've been thinking about what Mom wrote in her diary, about wanting to give me everything she had." "Oh?" "She did more than that. She gave me everything she dreamed of, a family, a purpose, a way to help others find their way home too." Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the celebration reflect in the conservatory windows. Behind their reflection, the garden roses glowed in the evening light, each bloom a testament to the care and love that had brought this family together. "You know what makes me happiest?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Watching you help these children find their voices, just like you found yours. Sarah would be so proud of the legacy you're building." Lucy leaned against him, feeling the weight of Eleanor's ring on her finger, the comfort of Sarah's necklace at her throat, the strength of her own heart, finding new ways to share the love that had saved her. In the background, Emma started teaching Tommy a simple piano piece, their laughter mixing with the music. Other children wrote in their diaries, sharing dreams and hopes that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Each one carried a piece of the Wellington legacy forward, not through blood, but through the choices they made every day to be kind, to be brave, to believe in love's power, to transform. The evening sky outside darkened to deep blue, stars appearing one by one like silver roses in an eternal garden. Inside, the conservatory glowed with warmth and possibility, a sanctuary where lost children could find their way home, where kindness multiplied with each sharing, where love left endless clues for others to follow. "Happy birthday, my dear," Alexander whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for bringing spring back to our family." Lucy smiled, watching as more children gathered around the piano, each one adding their voice to the harmony that filled their home. In her heart, she felt the presence of all the love that had brought them to this moment. Eleanor's wisdom, Sarah's courage, Alexander's transformation, and her own journey from a street corner to this place where dreams bloomed like roses, in an eternal spring. The story of Lucy and Alexander Wellington didn't end with a single homecoming or a simple happy ending. Instead, it continued to grow and bloom, touching more lives with each passing season. On this special evening, as Lucy's birthday celebration wound down, she found herself in the chapel making one final entry in her diary. "Dear Mom," she wrote, the words flowing from her heart. "Today I understand more than ever what you meant about love finding its way home. Every child who comes through our doors carries their own story, their own hopes, their own dreams. And just like you left clues for me to follow, we're leaving lights in the darkness for others to find their way." The chapel's stained glass. Windows reflected the last rays of sunset, casting rainbow patterns across the page as she wrote. Outside, she could hear the happy chatter of children heading back to the home, their voices carrying dreams that would fill tomorrow's pages. Alexander found her there, as he often did when she needed quiet moments of reflection. He sat beside her in the pew, the same spot where they had discovered Eleanor's box of treasures that had changed their lives forever. "I've been thinking," Lucy said, closing her diary gently, "about all the stories we've collected in these halls. About Emma finding her voice through music, about Tommy discovering his gift for gardening with Mr. Phillips, about how every child who comes here adds their own note to the symphony we're creating together." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. Each one of them carries a piece of Sarah's legacy forward, her belief in second chances, her faith in love's power to transform lives. Through the chapel windows, they could see the lights coming. On at the home, each window representing a different story of healing and hope. The garden paths glowed softly, lined with roses that bloomed year-round, just like the love that had brought their family together. "You know what Sister Mary told me today?" Lucy asked, touching her necklace thoughtfully. "She said that when I first came to St. Catherine's as a baby, I wouldn't stop crying until she showed me the rose pattern on my necklace. Even then, some part of me recognized the connection to home." Alexander smiled, his own hand going to his matching pendant. "Love leaves marks on our hearts that time can't erase. Your mother knew that when she left you with her necklace. Eleanor knew it when she created the rose box. And now we're creating new marks, new patterns of love for others to follow." As if to emphasize his words, the sound of piano music drifted. In from the home, Emma practicing the lullaby that had become their family's song. The melody carried through the evening air, a reminder of all the beauty that could grow from a single act of kindness. Lucy stood, walking to the memorial wall where Sarah's photographs told their family's story. The newest edition, the picture Richardson had brought of Sarah outside St. Catherine's, held a place of honor, showing the perfect circle their journey had created. "Sometimes," Lucy said softly, "I think about that day on the street corner, when you first tested my kindness. How neither of us knew we were finding our way home to each other." Alexander joined her at the wall, his voice gentle with memory. "We were both looking for the same thing, proof that love could survive even the hardest times. And what we found was so much more than either of us imagined." Outside, the stars began to appear, like silver roses blooming in the darkening sky. Each one seemed to represent a different story, of loss and finding, of healing and hope, of love that never gave up until it found its way home. Lucy touched her mother's photograph one last time before turning to leave. "Ready to go home, grandfather?" "My dear," Alexander smiled, taking her hand, "we are home. In every child's laugh, in every piano note, in every rose that blooms in our garden. Home isn't just a place. It's the love we share, the hopes we nurture, the dreams we help others discover." Together, they walked through the chapel that had preserved so many secrets and now witnessed so many new beginnings. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor, joining the eternal symphony of love finding its way home again and again in endless variations of the same beautiful song. In the garden, the roses continued their eternal bloom, each petal a testament to the legacy of love that had started with one mother's sacrifice, one grandfather's transformation, and one little girl's unwavering kindness. And in homes across the city, Children opened their diaries, touched their rose pendants, and added their own notes to the symphony that Lucy and Alexander had started. A symphony of love finding its way home, forever and always.